Welcome back to .NET Rocks. This is Carl Franklin.
And this is Richard Campbell.
We're getting ready for the launch of .NET 7. I know this is December 1st when you're listening to this, but we're recording this on November 7th.
Right. And literally this week is .NET Conf, and I am going to be hosting half of Wednesday.
That is so cool.
Yeah, it's going to be really fun. And so it gave me all the tough stuff. I got to talk about C. I got to be the host for the C# 11 talks. And Jeff Fritz makes me work.
Are you going to demonstrate their podcast Maui app?
No, I'm just a talking head. I don't have to do any real work, right? I just have to do the interstitials, and bring questions in from the audience, that kind of thing. So,
that's a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's a good gig, and it's fun to be down in Channel 9. At it's not Channel 9 anymore; it's Building 25. But we'd be directly involved. Represent. I'm
going to try to get involved next year. I was too busy this year, but maybe next year I can do that. That'd be fun. All right. Well, I have, in lieu of our guest, Reverend Billy. Hi, Billy.
Not a reverend.
Hey, Carl.
Not really a reverend, but I want to bring him in early because I want your comment on the Better Know Framework thing. So go ahead, roll the music.
All right, buddy, what do you got?
All right, so this is show 1822. So if you go to 1822.pwop.me, that will bring you to a Bored Panda article called 59 Hilariously Infuriating Examples of User Interface That Even Satan Himself Couldn't Come Up With. Now, it's not what you think. This isn't your typical Billy Hollis fodder that, these are real user interfaces that people have put out there and we're making fun of them. So let me just read the first.
At least you hope.
Yeah. Well, let me just read the first paragraph and it'll become clear. What if web developers suddenly stopped caring about user interface friendliness? The internet would become a cruel place. This idea has intrigued a few web design programmers so much that they have started competing on Reddit to try to figure out who can come up with the most annoying things for users. So take the various forms we fill out. For example, we input our names, addresses, and phone numbers, submit the data, and instantly move on with our order. Someone wrote quite a few code lines on website design to make this experience as seamless as possible, and believe it or not, they didn't have to. Though these interfaces cannot be found on the worst websites ever, they're still painstakingly funny and annoying. Scroll down to check out the time-consuming monsters and funny fails that will never see the light of day. They could have instead, and upvote your favorites. So I'm going to point out a couple for you guys. First of all, for Billy, scroll down to number 10.
Okay.
All right. So number 10, just check out the graphic here. So this is your typical volume adjuster, right? You hover over the volume speaker and you get this, what looks like a vertical green line. However, it doesn't move vertically. It moves horizontally.
So evil.
Isn't that terrible? All right. Now for you, Richard, scroll down to 15. This is, of course, for setting the volume, you have to play what?
You have to curl. It's like, you toss the rock and you have to keep sweeping if you want it to get louder. That's awesome.
All right. So for math nerds, scroll down to 21.
There you go. A little Pythagorean theorem.
This is to input your phone number XA plus Y to the B plus Z to the C, and you fill in the values. And there's another math nerd one at 23. Current volume. Please enter pi for volume. And the more
you have to get enough digits of pi correct. You got to get 100 digits of pi.
If you don't get them correct, it says fail. Try again.
Nice.
For Fitness Freak, scroll down to 27. And this is a bicycle pump that pumps up the volume, literally. And then when you get to 100, it slowly starts going down. So you got to pump it up again. All right. You liking this, Billy?
Well, I saw this about when it came out a few years
like 4 years ago. Yeah.
So and my favorite actually is number 5.
Yeah.
Number 5.
Which is to put a was it number 5? I think.
Yeah. Is this your phone number?
To put in a phone number, it just randomly puts a 10-digit phone number. It says, "Is this your number?"
Yes or no, and you just keep going until it hits
knows.
Yeah. For old school gamers, we have 33, which is Tetris. So you have to spell out the numbers in your phone number or make the numbers. Right?
Nice.
And number 40, which is Pac-Man. So 40, you actually play Pac to create the numbers.
I think they've added some since the first time I looked at this, because I looked at it not long after it came out.
Because it's still got voting in it too, right?
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
So the only one that looks good enough to be real is number 58. So this is where you select your primary phone number, one digit at a time, with drop-down lists that go from 0 to 9. And your secondary phone number.
Not good. No.
I have seen a real user interface that wasn't that far from this.
Nice.
Wow.
Not that good.
Well, anyway, that was for you, Billy, and no nutritional value whatsoever, but a good laugh.
Not even cautionary tales. Yeah, it's just funny.
Well, Richard, who's talking to us today?
Grabbed a comment off show 1766, the one we did with Billy back about a year ago, November 2021. We were talking about whether or not desktop development is still relevant, and just that whole conversation around XAML and the merits of desktop development. You got, and as usual with any Billy show, lots of comments on it. And I'll read this one from Eric Potter. He said, "I was intrigued by Billy's assertion that compositional thinking is harder to grasp than functional programming. It makes me think that I must not fully understand it. Can anyone recommend resources for learning compositional paradigms?" I would think that compositional design would be very similar to what was covered in the original Gang of Four Design Patterns book. The majority of patterns in the book use multiple classes to compose a solution to a common problem. Am I on the right track for this train of thought? And Billy, you replied, a longer reply than the question, which is always a hint. But
I did. I talked a little bit about how that kind of thinking about composition is in the patterns book is just the beginning, and that the compositional thinking has developed since then, and that XAML is highly compositional. Composition means that you're assembling pieces. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't just include how pieces are contained within other pieces, but also the links between pieces and things like that. So I went into that some in that comment.
You also went into the point of layering, which I thought was very profound.
Yeah.
Because you do think of composition as a chain of a set of links. But when you talk about visual representation in composition, the fact that you could change behavior by z-axis, playing with layering and effect, that is complex. Like, very clever people can go a long way down the path with that.
And
it's
possibly
amazing
down
what
the
you
path
can do.
to hell.
Yeah. It's amazing what you can do with composition and layering. And actually, I think I point out in the comment that people in the printing industry refer to layering in the physical world as compositing.
Right.
That really is a form of composition. And it's a very rarely used form because our technologies didn't support that until we got to XAML and then later HTML5. Earlier technologies, you really couldn't layer like that. So most of the people who are in positions of responsibility now came into the industry and learned all their stuff in a world where layering composition wasn't really a viable approach to do things. So they just don't think about it. And we haven't seen that many examples of it. I hope that we'll see that go forward.
I learned all that layering stuff from using Photoshop and Adobe Premiere. In the world of graphics and video, layering is what it's all about.
That's what you do. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure enough. Eric, thank you so much for your comment. A copy of Music to Code By is on its way to you. And if you'd like a copy of Music to Code By, write a comment on the website at .netrocks.com or on the Facebooks. We publish every show there. And if you comment there and I read it on the show, we'll send you a copy of Music to Code By.
And definitely follow us on Twitter. I'm at Carl Franklin and he's at Rich Campbell. Send us a tweet and you get extra points if you can use touch tone.
DTMF the tweet. I remember I used to get text messages when I got tweets because that used to be a good idea.
That was a good idea. I still know some people who send, never mind. Do we need to really introduce Billy? I mean, you should read his bio. He's been on .NET Rocks probably more than anybody else. He's
pretty close.
Thinks very deeply about user interface and user experience, and has some just absolutely great workshops and talks where his examples of good and bad UI will blow your mind. Welcome back, Billy.
Thanks. When I got the mail from Richard, it's been a year.
It's been a year. That was exactly my reaction too, right?
And my age, boy, a year gets by pretty fast. And I was just surprised when I thought about how long it had been. So I'm happy to be back.
Yeah.
And part of this for me is I'm thinking through my next year's content trees, the story arcs. And I just don't feel like desktop development moved very far this year.
No, it's in a state of kind of stasis, I guess you'd say, but nevertheless, it's not really pulling back that much. There's still tons of it out there. We're still starting new projects. There is a space within the industry where we use a term as we work with clients. We call certain levels of design and with interactivity and all that layering stuff I talked about, we call that high design, which is meant to be different from, you go in and you do design to get the aesthetics right and to get the colors right and things like that, which has value. Nobody wants an ugly app or ugly website. But high design takes the capabilities of technology and applies them to a business's needs in a more sophisticated way. Yeah. The more you move into high design, the more you need what the more advanced desktop technologies can do.
Right.
And the more you need the ability for users to very quickly and transparently get to places. Touch is wonderful for anything that's mobile. And I don't mean to denigrate touch in any sense, and we write touch-based systems, but there are certainly systems where people are sitting at our economy runs on people sitting at their desk and getting stuff done to make a business work. And that might be in browser-based software.
Or people in the service industry using touchscreen applications to take your orders and to do things, right?
And that's fine. For a certain simple workflows, touchscreen is fine. But as you start to move up into more complex data and decision support and things like that, now touch has a role to play, but there's more that you need to be able to do there. And you have to be prepared to understand the limitations. Actually, I did a session at NDC Oslo entitled, "Wouldn't It Be Cool?" and other failed design approaches. and one of the examples in that session talks about the F-35 fighter. Mm-hmm. The F-35 fighter has a ton of touchscreens. But the problem is a touchscreen doesn't fit in the environment of a fighter pilot for the routine things he does. Because there's no tactile feedback. He doesn't know whether or not he's turned it on or not. He has to look to see what's going on. He's used to tactile switches. A fighter pilot is used to flipping a switch, feeling that it's flipped, and knowing that it's flipped.
Right.
I mean, and what they found is that about 20% of the time, somebody tries to do it touch-based, and it doesn't take. Well, that's not really a luxury that a fighter pilot can indulge in, is it?
Mm-hmm. Right. Much less trying to touch a button while taking G's.
Yeah, exactly. So that's an extreme example, of course, but it's an illustration of the general principle that touch is fabulous. And man, I think the phone right now is just beautifully optimized to use touch. Even though the screen is very small, touch just does the trick, and we don't have to have anything else. Yeah.
Until it doesn't. I was literally 5 minutes ago out on the deck with my wife, and we were just talking. And I was looking at my smokeless fire pit and thinking, winter's coming. I should get a lid for that thing. I bet they're expensive. And I found one on Amazon on my phone right there. I went to add it to cart, and nothing happened. In other words, the add to cart button wasn't disabled. It just didn't work.
It just didn't work.
Nice.
I'm seeing a lot of that.
Good thing I wasn't flying an F-34, man.
I'm seeing a lot of that, but that is more, in my mind, more comes out of the sloppiness in creating apps and websites than it comes out of the concept of touch. because I see places that use touch effectively and every time it's doing fine. But if you're pressing a button and you're not getting any results, that says that the events are being propagated through the system. It doesn't say that you aren't, that the phone is screwing up the touch.
Or a bug somewhere.
Hey, I mean, you don't really know, right? Like you don't know, is it the device part of the capacitive touch isn't working? Is it the browser's not,
the capacitive
passing
touch
events?
Was working, but here's the thing.
I know your problem doesn't fit that, but it's like the average person has no idea of all the different layers it takes place to simulate that effect.
Well, if I was going to create a bug like that, it would be a logic bug. It would be, if, some Boolean that's 56 characters long is false, then allow it to go through. Otherwise not, right? It's some logic bug because all the other buttons worked. It's just infuriating when it doesn't work.
And it is infuriating. And to me, we figured out what the interaction patterns ought to be, but that doesn't necessarily mean that all dev teams are able to do it. I'm finding in particular that mobile apps are not getting, I don't know. What do you guys think? It looks to me like maybe they're not getting the talent to really do them in a way that they're reliable and performant.
I've also noticed this lately, marked decrease in quality.
Well, I think part of that is we still need talent. You need really skilled people. I don't like the word talent. Really skilled people to build mobile apps. They haven't moved into mainstream development, and yet there's a mainstream need for mobile apps. Like the tooling just has not gotten good enough so that the average developer could expect to build a usable mobile app.
Well, I think that's fair.
Yeah. Not sure I agree, Richard.
I see it almost as bad though in websites. So it's like some of the, I think there's a similar problem in some of the front end parts of websites and maybe even the back end part, because in some cases, as you said, Richard, it looks like that the real problem is on the back end somewhere. It's not really in the front end. So, I've got the entire, I think I'd already started this the last time we were on, we did a show where I put up tweets showing examples with the Twitter tag Rust Age of Software.
Right.
We're not in the golden age. We're in the rust age.
Yeah. I think one of the, to rebut your opinion there, Richard, I think that one of the problems is the tooling has gotten too good and maybe one too many wizards and one too many shortcuts are available that make it possible to develop an app without really understanding what's going on. I think the tooling's really good and it's great for, if you understand what the tools do and you know how to use them correctly. But I think there may be just too many ways to build an app that don't require an understanding of architecture or programming.
Back in the day, you didn't have to understand architecture to make a WinForms app work. You know, like you needed to know a lot more to be successful with XAML and WPF.
The constraints were helpful there, though, weren't they? I mean, nobody really had choices. You had one button. You had one list box, one drop box.
It is an interesting time. I mean, again, if people can mess up with the tools to the point where the button doesn't work, I still think the tool's not helping them enough.
Yeah, something's going on there. Anyway, that's my rant. Getting off my soapbox.
Billy, tell me what's wrong with Maui.
Well, the flavor of XAML that comes with it is not up to my expectations. It's very new, and I haven't really done projects with it enough to analyze its weaknesses in depth. From what I have seen, it is supposed to do various platforms, but really everybody seems to use it for Android and iOS.
Yeah. Well, that seems to be the problem, right?
And so those platforms, okay, things get fixed there, but all the other platforms don't really get the attention because people aren't stressing the product enough. But I don't want to put too much of my own weight on my own opinion there, because I am actually this is starting in December. I've set aside some time to do some investigation of a lot of things that are current, including both Maui and the Uno platform and WinUI 3. I've got some conversion projects to move into those environments. So I'll know more then. But at this point, look, we do Xamarin projects, and we would really be lost without it for some of the multi-platform stuff that we do. And I don't want what I have to say to be slamming it. But it comes out of that mobile world, and therefore it doesn't have as rich a set of capabilities for the kind of apps that we build. And so it's hard for me to get excited about it. The people who are doing it, I think, kind of have this vision that it is a grand unified solution for native development across a broad range. And I respect that vision. I really do. But I think that vision is much harder to implement than the people doing it seem to think.
Billy, I can support your opinion about the iOS and Android stuff being okay, and the Windows in particular taking a back seat. Just in the RC1 or RC2, I think it was RC1, did they allow you to set the window position and size without native code in a Windows application?
Yikes. The capability I look for, and this applies to WinUI and UWP and lots of other things, to see whether they really understand and are targeted at the complexity of true Windows applications, is how hard is it to create another window and manage it so that your app can have more than one window. UWP, when it first came out, couldn't do that at all.
Right.
And there are still limitations in UWP and WinUI going forward in that. Of course, they put this stuff out and it doesn't do things like that, and everybody complains. And they eventually put that in the pipeline, but it takes way longer than it should. And because I don't think it's that hard, but they just don't think to do it. So they create an architecture where it's hard.
Yeah, but here's the question, Matt. How do you get to a place where you think, well, they're not going to need this, so we're not going to do it until they complain? Like, what kind of apps are they building?
What, mobile, tablet, single screen apps.
Right.
Their entire mindset is around that kind of app. So those kind of capabilities, as I said, there's a space where you really need to be able to give people with multiple monitors and a mouse and a keyboard the ability to do some serious interaction. One of the key characteristics of those kinds of apps is that what they're doing isn't feature based. It's workflow based. That you have to be able to, for a certain step in a workflow, there's multiple pieces of things that you need to be able to refer to get that step of the workflow done. How would you do that on a phone or even a tablet? That would take some really sophisticated design. And for moderate to simple workflows, you start to get into very complex workflows, and you're probably not going to be able to do that at all without multiple monitors. So those people who work in that space come from that mobile world, and they simply have never written those kinds of apps.
Sure.
So it just doesn't occur to them that those features are needed.
But it also occurs to me that most mainstream developers are living in a multi-monitor world. They're in their build space, so they automatically want things that way. Maybe I phrased the question wrong, but it's also like, are they thinking wrong for wanting multiple windows, or is Microsoft thinking wrong for not providing that out of the box?
I think Microsoft's position on that, and it goes back to UWP, is that it just didn't hit them. Remember, UWP came out of the Windows 8 code set, which was created for touch, tablets, borderless screens. It really wasn't created for a multi-monitor world.
Yeah.
And it wasn't designed for that. And so UWP came out of that. And it appears that, look, I was a Windows Dev MVP for a long time, and I worked with the team quite a bit. And I found it difficult to get across to them the need for some of these capabilities. And what it came back to is they're systems devs who do things within a window, a piece of the screen. That's their way of thinking about the world. They don't do these complex desktop apps that balance lots and lots of different things, except for the people that create the shell. And they are apparently not the ones who are figuring out what these platforms like UWP are doing. Mm-hmm. I think that's part of it. And part of it is that there's always more features than they could conceivably put in, given the time and resources that they're doing. They have to prioritize. They have to cut. They have to delay. And so those two things fit together, because their judgment on what to cut and what to delay is affected by their own experience. And their own experience says, oh yeah, people don't really need that feature too bad. We know theoretically some people need it, but viscerally they don't understand that people need it.
But then they will take the feedback from the customer and then change their direction. Yeah.
Yeah.
If I could play devil's advocate for 1 minute, I think the point of Maui architecturally is to provide the same experience on the desktop that you get on the phone, not to replace WPF or Windows Forms or any of those things, but to be able to take something that will run on an iPhone and an iPad and an Android tablet and whatever, and run it natively on a Mac desktop and a Windows desktop. Once you start saying, hey, Microsoft, we want all these features in Windows that don't apply to tablets and stuff, they're not going to do it. And I don't think it's because of a lack of vision. I think it's mostly because that doesn't fit the Maui kind of, the idea that we want it to look and work the same on all these different devices. And if you really want those features that you're asking for, write it in WPF. That's what it's for.
Well, that's fair enough. That's the way they're looking at it. So that you could write an app that would run on iOS, but could also be in the App Store for Windows 11 or whatever. And certainly there's a space for that. But in this incredibly large world of different needs and different hardware and different monitors and different input methods, think about all the different input methods, and that we'll get more as time goes on. I still think we're going to get something with gesture, or maybe those guys that are doing the headbands that sense your brainwaves are going to get it right, or something.
Bicycle pump volume. That's what I want.
So when you look at the complexity that we're going, everybody has to kind of figure out what their space is and address and work in that space. So I respect them if they've done that. But then you can't simultaneously do that and say, okay, you should just be going to this platform because it's going to be the only thing you'll ever need. I mean,
I think I've never heard Microsoft say it's going to be the only thing you'll ever need. I think
I guess maybe some enthusiastic people in the presentations I've seen.
Oh, maybe
have sounded a little bit.
I mean, everything that I've heard Dan Roth say and all these other guys, Gerald Versluvius, is that this is the evolution of Xamarin Forms. And it's for a single code base that can go everywhere with roughly the same experience. And that's it. And
I'm fine with that. And there's a space for that. But I don't live in it except for about 20% of what we do.
Right. And I'd say, Billy, I'd rather have a WPF app built by you than a Maui app for Windows built by anybody. So
maybe they were harboring this fundamental delusion, this write once, run everywhere is a delusion.
It's always been a delusion, Richard.
Well, there's always constraints that
all the way back to the 90s.
There's always constraints that limit the intersection of what you can do everywhere. Always.
And I admire the vision. I really do. Because we've talked about the fact this quality problem comes out of the fact that development is, you have to know too much to do it. And so what they're trying to do is go, all right, well, you might have to know a lot, but you only have to know a lot about this one thing. And then you can sort of expand to the various places you need it. That's an extremely admirable vision. But all right, you guys ready for some real blue sky thinking here?
Maybe after the break. Can we take a break first?
After the break, okay.
All right, we'll take a break. We'll be right back after this message.
Hey, our sponsor today is Raygun, Carl, and we've got JD Trask with us.
All right.
Hey, JD.
Howdy.
I'm going to dig into that enterprise stuff and talk about scaling websites, because I've done a lot of that, and I've logged a lot of different ways. Can you talk to me a bit about your experiences when websites get really big and tools like logging have an effect?
Do you mean the impact on, say, the cost or the overhead of having it in there?
Well, there's that part. There's also the performance aspects, too. Like logging's not free, especially at scale.
Yeah, absolutely. So Raygun itself, we've built our products to scale from, I'm starting a side project and I only want to maybe spend a couple of dollars, through to our largest customer. We have tracked the performance for 87 million concurrent users users of their application.
What?
So we can kind of go full end to end in there.
Wow.
It's pretty big. Raygun processes a lot of data.
I thought my 300 users was big.
Yeah. Well, at that level, we like to think of it as how does Raygun make sure it can scale for those customers? And we've done some really amazing work on that. We leverage a lot of the benefits that have actually come out of the .NET Core work from Microsoft. That's helped us a lot. We have .NET on the background. But for the customer, that one that had 87 million concurrent users, you can understand they were a multi-platform business. So that application was running on smart TVs, PCs, right down to almost Casio calculator level, processors. So the level of performance work we were doing ourselves to make sure that it was minimal overhead to ensure that customer was having great success with Raygun. I love that sort of work though, personally, trying to find performance optimization. So there's that element. And then of course, making sure you provide a service that provides things like inbound filters and screening to make sure you're not just collecting the noise from logs. You actually want the actionable stuff. And that's how you can manage the cost side while also at scale.
What you mean is more to the metrics of logging than the size of the log file?
Look at all that data.
Yeah.
Well, we've all been there, right? There's my log file. It's 87 gigabytes in size.
Yeah. Oh, boy. I'm going to open it in Notepad and figure things out.
It's the joys of software.
Now, I really appreciate the instrumentation you have as well to help me understand what's going on inside my app and the logging that's there. And if you'd like to know more about Raygun, go to raygun.com and click on the free trial.
Beautiful.
Awesome.
And we're back. It's .NET Rocks. I'm Carl Franklin. That's Richard Campbell.
Hey.
And that's Billy Hollis. And he was just about to go postal on us.
Blue sky here. Yeah.
Here we go.
Because having watched this industry over a long span of time, every certain amount of times pass, enough technology changes that the way apps are redeveloped is completely rethought.
Mm-hmm.
There's an entirely new paradigm for how you do apps. And the biggest one in our lifetime was when we went from character-based, indexed ISAM, centralized processing to client-server, GUI interfaces, event-driven program, which was the beginning of the asynchronous world, basically.
Right.
So that the way we thought about development before that, just the procedural sort of way of that people thought in the COBOL world and the other languages that came out of that 80s era, just simply didn't fit anymore. And so we ended up with Visual Basic and Power Builder and Fox Pro and things that completely changed the way people thought about development. And I like to remind people, because if they didn't live through that, they don't understand how rapidly that a new way of thinking can just waltz in and take over. Visual Basic was introduced in 1991. The first version was not really quite ready for the sort of stuff you wanted to do. Version 3 was introduced a couple of years later, and finally it was pretty capable. So we're talking 1993, and then the last version of Visual Basic Classic was introduced in 1998. By that time, there were more lines of code in Visual Basic than in any language in the world, including COBOL.
6 million developers.
Yeah, it just absolutely flushed everything else aside. Well, we kind of got a little mini version of that as we moved into the web world, the stateless web world, and a lot of the asynchronous stuff that went with that. We rethought how applications should be done as much as anything, from the layered interior layers, etc. And we've had refinements of that. I mean, we've settled on things like REST as ways of getting the data around. So that was a pretty big changeover. I just have the intuition that the cloud and all the technologies that come out of it are dictating that it's time for another rethink.
Sure.
That the combination of compositional thing. Think about the need for compositional things in a cloud-based world. You've got all these engines you need to plug in. Why in the name of all that's sane are you having to learn all these APIs?
Right.
Right.
Well, if I'm doing an interface and I want to enter a field and I want it to have dictation possibilities, voice capabilities. That ought to be a checkbox somewhere.
Yep.
There's no way in the world I ought to be having to go to an API to figure that out.
Right.
And you can multiply that by as many examples as you like.
Yeah.
And so I look at things like distributed workflow, which has enormous value in business application software. Every company I go into has workflow. It's just that it's all just kludged up stuff talking to SQL Server tables. The cloud enables true distributed workflow in a way that could be packaged so that there's very, very little development that people actually have to do in order to make workflow work across the entire world. Okay, you start to take things like that, the compositional need, all the engines that do things on the internet that need to be transparently integrated into software. Now we're looking at a world. I think we're ripe. We're ripe for a world in which we rethink the idea of what a designer is for software, so that we have never taken advantage of the fact that we can do all kinds of 3D stuff in our UI now. When you move to a compositional based way of thinking about software, now you almost have to have 3D. You've got to have the ability to look at that model of things, all the different things that are hooking together and how they're hooking together. The flat screen's never going to do that for you. So different kind of designer, different kind of metadata.
Billy, have you been hired by Meta? Are you are you a Meta guy right now? Do you have a Quest coming in the mail?
No, I absolutely don't. In fact, I will refrain from expressing my opinion of the Meta company.
Oh, I wish you would.
Because it is.
Don't refrain.
It is bad.
I think the market has spoken pretty clearly about the state of Meta.
Yeah.
Yeah. So no, it's just, but Meta wants to position themselves as the ultimate. You're going to do everything 3D through us. Yeah. And I don't know if that's going to.
Doesn't seem to be flying at all.
Shoot. I'm not even thinking in terms of wearing devices to do 3D. I'm thinking in terms of 3D on the screen that we can just, we have handles to move things around and look at it from different angles.
Isn't this the Power Apps model too? That they, a lot of defaults, a lot of filtering, cloud first.
Yeah, Power Apps has gotten some things right that would feed into this. Power Apps sort of came about in a world that only encompasses, again, a certain space within application development. So yeah, I'm feeling like it's time for someone to really create this thing that develops software, but is completely redone for the cloud. So, for example, the way you put in data structures would be different. You would have all kinds of starter kits for data structures.
Sure.
So now you could go get entire database schemas and it would become a part of your app
with standard patterns,
with everything concerned about getting that data in and out of UI already there. So I feel, I have sketches of some of the stuff I've done for this.
And you don't think this kind of thing exists yet?
No. My vision, they aren't even close, because I keep up with this. I look at all the low code and no code type environments, and they have little pieces of that vision that I have in my head, but no.
Well, and I appreciate the upside to the architecture of the Power Apps model is, if they were to put a 3D component in, it would just be a component. You wouldn't be starting over. It would just be a UX element over top of abstracted data elements and services in the cloud.
And one other feature one of the capability that it has to have. See, Visual Basic had this. And as best I can tell, a lot of these low code things fail because they don't have it. And that is what I call an escape hatch.
Right.
Because as we've said, none of these things are going to do everything. So now what do? When you bump up against the ceiling? Well, in Visual Basic, we drop back to the Windows API.
Right.
We had the ability to interface to it, or even to do C components, C++ components, and interface to them. And so we had an escape hatch. We could do 96% of our app in VB, speed all that up, and then have that remaining percentage done with more in-depth tools. And if you're really going to succeed at the kind of enterprise scale that I think this kind of effort ought to be aimed, then you're going to have an escape hatch.
Yeah, and it's one of the things I always look for in any good set of tools is when this platform breaks down, well, how do you dig below it? What's available to you?
And for God's sake, don't make it Node.js, okay?
Yeah, please don't make it Node.js. The one place where I consistently run out of dimensions is data analytics. Like the whole drilling and mining of data, you rapidly have stacks of windows, or, you're into an array of data sets with that. A better visualizer would make a huge difference.
Yeah.
I don't see that typically on the form side of stuff, but I do see it often when I'm pursuing an intuition about a data set.
Is AI going to save us, Richard?
I think the machine learning models just allow us to organize data faster, find associations, but that, I'm going back to Ralph Kimball's terminology, the old OLAP terminology all the way back to the 90s. This pursuit of intuition, that you have a sense of something that's odd in the edges of the data. And when we spent literally millions to build systems so that you wouldn't interrupt that intuition. But we always battled with the user interface of that. The ability to explore data deeply has always been a struggle.
And it becomes more valuable with every passing year because we've got more data.
Mm-hmm.
See, I make this point a lot when I go into teams that are making a platform change. They need to shift their thinking because they came about in a world where 70% plus of the app was screens to get data in and out.
Right.
Well, we're back to, we stopped that 10 years ago, and now we're looking at probably 25 or 30% screens like that. And a lot, just almost as many screens that do exactly what you said. There are a lot of screens that promote workflow and things like that, but there are also views that are specifically around visualizing that data so that people can make good decisions. The data's not doing them any good if it's just sitting in a repository somewhere and there's no good way to get to it.
Right.
99 users out of 100 are not going to figure out how to grab that data and turn it into a form that's consumable. So, and as an industry, as a profession, we have been markedly delinquent, negligent at that. And part of that is because data visualization beyond pie charts and bar charts, it requires design.
Right.
It requires understanding the problem and what you're looking for in the data and the principles of how you expose that data so that people see what they need to. And there's a lot of Power BI stuff out there that does stuff within the package. And I think that's great. And again, it solves a certain space of problems. But with the complexity of the data that you talked about there, Richard, that requires design thinking to get into how do you expose this data in a way where people see what they need to see.
Well, we started this conversation talking about high level design. Now I feel like we've looped back neatly onto this is where high level design comes into play. All too often, we're designing apps to load data into databases and not thinking about how that data can be utilized to make decisions.
Well, that's just it. As I kind of referred to, we shouldn't be thinking in this modern era about apps being just to get data into databases. We ought to be thinking about it promoting workflow within the organization. And see, the typical developer coming out of the 90s and up through the early part of the century thinks about an app in terms of features, of capabilities, and you can see it in the menus that they create. That let's say that you have a business and there are 5 or 6 common reasons people call into your business. And you need to go to a different place in the software for all of them, which means you have to learn all of that. Well, what's wrong with designing a view that basically has those 5 things as big tiles and just says, okay, they call in to get this information, bam, go there, and then creating the workflow that goes with that. So yeah.
Edit thyself, developer.
I'm sorry? What?
Edit thyself, developer.
Edit thyself, yeah. So the developers don't think in terms of workflow. And in terms of high design and why you do it, one of the biggest returns on investment is to do workflow that speeds people up and it keeps them from making mistakes and keeps them from leaving steps out.
Right.
One of the workflows we did was to do some import of data from external systems. And the system as it existed would allow you to do it just fine. The problem is it put no guardrails around it so that you could import things out of order or you could forget to import a particular thing. Well, we developed a workflow and visualized it so that users were walked through the 6 or 8 steps that help them get that data in, with things lighting up that when they became available according to the rules, and not even available for them to press if they hadn't done the things that were prerequisites, that kind of thing, because fixing the problem after they made a mistake, and these were fairly low tech users, was just monstrously expensive in terms of customer support. So yeah, developers don't think enough about workflow. And that's one of the reasons why I think that the cloud-based system that I envision makes workflow so easy to integrate that a non-programmer could do it.
You kind of can't avoid it.
Yeah. And just get that stuff in there, because so many businesses need better workflow, and it's all custom developed by people who don't understand workflow. I mean, look, Microsoft, how many times has Microsoft gotten workflow wrong?
Yeah. They made a career out of it.
Yeah. BizTalk didn't get workflow right because they think of it in terms of code, and the orchestration was basically a code-based way of thinking about workflow. And then they
Windows Workflow Foundation.
And Workflow Foundation 1, Workflow Foundation 2. And this will be a controversial statement, okay? But I think they're currently in the process of screwing it up with logic apps. Because again, their approach to workflow is too code-centric. Mm-hmm. They're not, the basics of workflow are work items, queues of work items to hold them, rules to make transition things among workflows and process them. And none of Microsoft's solutions have ever approached workflow from that perspective.
Well, and you'd see them feeling around in the Power App space where logic apps have largely landed now. But it always comes in. I appreciate that Microsoft does keep twitching these things as they start to see a bigger view or a smaller view on it, and then tries again. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's disruptive for us as developers, because if you commit to any of these stacks, sometimes the stacks change dramatically, or they get, worst of all, they don't actually take it away from you. They just tell you it's deprecated. So now your boss is mad at you.
You remember that thing? We got a new thing now. Just get rid of that thing.
Don't worry about that old thing now.
Yeah.
And I respect the vision. I respect their interest and willingness to make things better for their customers, because doing a lot of that is what makes Azure is for a lot of companies going to make Azure essential to their business. They're going to be on Azure for the next 20 years because they can't help it once they create a lot of these things.
Well, especially when I think about them, if you get pulled into Power Platform, you're not going anywhere.
You're not
they
going
gotcha.
Yeah, we've got you.
That only runs in Azure.
So I respect their desire to do that, both the business-like and the psychological. I mean, look, I think most of the people in this business want other people to use their stuff and make their own careers and lives better. So I get all that. But it's, as somebody who works in the field of design and has now for a long time at various levels, all the way up to design thinking across entire companies, where you end up with a whole suite of apps that are interrelated to replace. Oh, let's say one of the ones we did was to replace all of the production for sales forecasting, acquiring things, daily production, scheduling of the people for a multi-billion-dollar organization with 5 factories. So that kind of design is fairly rare, but it is enormously valuable. So doing that kind of design for these kind of projects at the beginning would make things 10 times or maybe 100 times easier to get to that good design. The problem is they don't want to understand the problems they're trying to solve. We talked about this earlier. They want to get something out there and get reaction to it.
Right.
I'm sorry. That's lazy.
Yeah.
Okay. It's because they want to be working on code and stuff. And inside the culture at Microsoft, you pretty much got to do that in order to get ahead. That's their culture.
I used to say this as a joke, right? When Office hit like version 10 or 11, it's like, they've hit the point now where it's in their best interest to create bad features, because that creates a new version, which then is followed by a second version where they take the feature back out again.
And to me, the app that really showed the need to do this was Microsoft Teams. which just floundered with some of its designs early on.
Well, they're groping around for how do we do collaboration?
Yeah.
And nobody has a good answer. Nobody has a good vision.
But I think they could have had a good vision if they went through the right process at the beginning. Now, would they have nailed it completely? No. We like to see, my partner, Gary Bailey, says, if we achieve an 80% hit on the target from our understanding and design, that we're doing really good. There's always going to be more to fill in. But I mean, what were they hitting in teams? 20%, 25%? Sure. And design efforts can increase that percentage. And look, this has been a part of
I wonder if
our industry.
I think this also sits on the political side, where if I don't get it in the field and see people using it, I'm not going to keep getting resources.
That's probably true, but then that means that the company is setting up the incentives wrong. Now, but there's another constraining factor, and I kind of understand it. All right, so let's imagine that we did want to do this kind of effort within Microsoft. We wanted to bring these Microsoft people together and get through a design process. You would have to have one of the finest facilitators in the world to manage that group. Make sure everybody felt like they'd been heard. Make sure that everybody's ideas were considered, and to force the group to a set of designs and ideas that everybody was going to support going forward. That, let me tell you, that is a monstrous challenge in these big organizations.
Sure.
You got people with big egos, and managing them to get to a place where people feel like they've done the right thing, that 80% solution, and then going forward, that the team lead that does that, I mean, such people are enormously constrained in this industry.
Sure.
I don't know more than half a dozen.
Well, I also argue that Microsoft is particularly jumpy about this. You know, Windows 8 was built in the dark with a grand vision. It just failed mightily.
Yeah, because
we've been there.
I don't like bashing Microsoft so much, but
but
because they've done better.
We're talking about we want them to do better.
We want them to do better. I am also
empathetic to the fact that when they had their strongest example in the past 10 years that of trying to do that grand vision thing was Win 8.
Was Win 8, and they failed. And I think that's because they thought that learning how to do that design process and learning how to go through it, et cetera. Look, Microsoft people are really smart, and they tend to think, I can learn how to do anything in a week or something. That they really thought that the design aspects of it, not only the principles and how you think about things and how you go through a process, it's a discipline. It takes years to acquire. But for them, they thought they could do it in a few weeks and just kind of, we're smart. We're going to do it. They went with the Bauhaus School of Design.
Oh, it's very colorful.
Yeah,
I like all the colors.
You like those Power Ranger colors?
Yeah, I love all the colors.
It's helped me make a lot of Run-As mugs. I'm very happy.
Very bright. Yeah. I like the bright colors.
So they got fundamental things wrong because of their immaturity in design. Because look, if your design is based on, wouldn't it be cool? That's one of the most dangerous phrases in the industry. They tried so hard to be cool, to wave a flag going, look, I'm cool. We have great design. If somebody does that, that's like a 98% chance of failure right there.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's hard for them. I'm not saying that this sort of thing is easy. I understand why the teams group didn't do it, because the team sounds wrong to me.
That's problematic.
the group that does teams. I understand why they didn't do it. It's hard finding the people to do it, and the culture there is all around code. Because when I've worked with groups, I talk to them about design things. They go, "Oh, we have designers," and what they mean is they have visual designers,
right?
And they don't really grasp what the definition of design that I'm talking about. Yeah, interaction design thinking.
And really an architectural design as well. I mean, that's what high design really gets into. Is
Yeah,
you're really talking about changing the way people work and then allowing software to help them with that. Because you've walked through all the elements.
And doing that kind of high design architecture is much easier when you've gone through the process of doing high design about how the thing is going to work from the user's perspective.
Right.
Those two things aren't divorced. And I think that they don't understand the connection there. And there's this feeling I see in sort of some of the MVP based agile-ish way of doing things is that you just, that the way you get software done is by throwing something out there and then iterating until you get it where it should be. But I don't know, guys. Again, I'm open to opinions on this, but even with microservices and such, I don't see how you do that with architecture. I've never seen a case where somebody throws out a bad architecture or a mediocre architecture and evolves that to a really good architecture. In any examples you guys know of? I don't know.
No. It's something that can't be iterated in an agile way. It has to be completely thought out because it's so fundamental, right? I mean, everything that you do flows from that architecture. And if, we're going to make this little change here, can completely screw up your efforts.
Yeah.
Hey, Billy, before we jump off, I want to know what you think of this app that we're using right here to record this podcast. And we're not taking any money from them, so I'm really not going to say who it is. But, I guess I don't mind. It's Riverside, right? Riverside FM.
Yeah, they've got that thing. Okay. Well, overall, the best thing I can say is I haven't noticed anything I don't like.
Yeah.
It just worked.
It seems to work underneath pretty well.
It's not cluttered.
It's not cluttered. It's apparently trying to solve a fairly straightforward problem and do it with minimal amount of stuff. So I would have to use it more before I can make a critique, but I don't see anything wrong with it. The visual design is good. The iconography is good.
Yeah.
The dark color, the dark theme actually makes a lot of sense if you're doing a video.
Yes, it does.
Because you want the video stuff to kind of be the foreground and stand out. We've been in that situation before when we did our app for 3M for radiologists. You absolutely have to have a dark theme there because it's a low light situation. And a lot of these are going to be, shot in controlled light situations. So I like the dark theme. And it was easy as pie to kind of get into. So I'd have to do a more exhaustive analysis, taking some time.
Well, Richard and I both like it a lot.
What I do see it looks good.
I noticed that they put the echo cancellation switch front and center, which is somebody thought hard or realized like the one problem you're going to have with multi-conversations is echo. So make sure it's echoing. I have a place to touch right away, not stacked in a menu somewhere right there. Smart.
Yeah.
Now I do notice that the settings button is in an odd location compared to most apps. I don't know that it's really bad, but it's kind of an odd location in the lower right.
Yours is in lower right? Mine's in lower left.
I'm sorry, lower left.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just got my left and right there. But you can look up the Gutenberg diagram principle in design principles to understand why. But that might not be such a bad thing in the sense that you don't use the settings that often or whatever. And I've seen much worse. Halo Infinite has the exit to desktop option under the settings menu.
What?
Which I just think is insane.
That should be the escape key, man.
Yeah. Something. Yeah. Well, so yeah, no, I'm okay with it.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
All right.
We're pretty happy with it too.
Yeah, so far so good.
So far so good. And they haven't lost any recordings, right, Richard?
I like that feature. That's a good feature.
Yeah. All right, Billy, what's next for you? What do you want? What are you off to? Are you coming to Dev Intersection?
Now, I will be at Dev Intersection, but I've got some stuff to do before then. Tomorrow, I'm getting on a plane to go to Prague for the Update Conference, which one of the regional directors, Thomas, it's one of those Eastern European names, and I'm an ugly American, and I don't know how to pronounce them.
Yeah.
So, and so I'm really looking forward. I've never been to Eastern Europe, and I've always wanted to go.
Do me a favor, have some meat.
Yeah.
You're there.
They're good about the meat there. It's also a great place to do Christmas shop. Like they have great Christmas markets and stuff. Like if you're looking for things.
I will look for that. Though. I'll leave a little room in my
make a little room in
my
your
bags.
For sure.
And then I'll be at NDC, Minnesota.
We all will be there.
Yeah. And so that doing workshop, and I'm doing the keynote there.
Nice.
Lies developers tell themselves.
I did, and I can say that because this hasn't come out. This comes out in December, but I did a 3-day workshop on Blazor there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hopefully it was good.
This is cool.
And then of course, I will be at Dev Intersection. And then
the show comes out right before that.
Yeah. And things are starting to line up for next year. I'll be in Vegas for VS Live's conference there. So yeah, I've got various things to do. Understand though, and I tell this for my audience just to set expectations. I got another couple of years of this traveling around to conferences, and we're going to see some pretty serious pullback. travel for someone my age starts to become quite a burden.
And I know what you mean.
For my age, what are you talking about?
Especially the European travel. Huh?
Travel for my age. All right, Billy, it's been a pleasure as always, and certainly a lot to think about and a lot to chew on. Thanks very much.
I appreciate the opportunity to get some of these ideas out. I walk around my house mumbling to myself about these things.
So that's why I call you, so you can mumble to us too.
Mumble to you.
All right, guys, we'll see you next time on .NET Rocks.
.NET Rocks is brought to you by Franklin's Net and produced by Plop Studios, a full-service audio, video, and post-production facility located physically in New London, Connecticut, and of course in the cloud. Online at pwop.com. Visit our website at dotnetrocks.com for RSS feeds, downloads, mobile apps, comments, and access to the full archives going back to show number 1, recorded in September 2002. And make sure you check out our sponsors. They keep us in business. Now go write some code. See you next time. Got transmitter banned by the FCC. Yes, I'm a